What if God has been inside of you this entire time? What if everything you have ever prayed to, feared, worshipped, or begged for forgiveness from was never out there at all? What if the most stunning, mind-bending truth in the history of human thought is that God, the one that actually shows up in moments of profound crisis, in dreams, in the terrifying dark night of the soul, is not a being watching from above, but rather, the real God is a living, breathing structure buried so deep inside the human mind that most people will go their entire lives without ever acknowledging it. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious. And once someone truly understands what that means, then they will see themselves, their suffering, their spiritual longing, and their deepest fears in a whole new light. Part 1. The God nobody taught anyone about. Everyone gets handed a version of God early in life. Maybe it was the bearded patriarch on a golden throne. Maybe it was an energy force, a universe that has a plan. Maybe it was nothing at all, just silence and the cold comfort of materialism. But Jung proposed something so radical, so eye-opening, that it essentially collapsed the wall between psychology and metaphysics entirely. He said that beneath every individual human mind, beneath memory, personality, trauma, and ego, there exists a shared layer of psyche. He said there's a basement that belongs to no single person. This basement contains a deep, dark ocean of images, patterns, and symbols that every human being on this planet has inherited simply by being human. This, in a nutshell, is the collective unconscious. And here's where Jung's theory gets extraordinary. If someone maps what lives inside that collective basement, including the archetypes, the recurring symbols, and the universal stories, they find something that looks unmistakably like what every major religion has been trying to describe for thousands of years. These archetypes include the Great Mother, the Rising Hero, the Shadow, the Wise Old Man, and the Trickster. These aren't just nice stories. Jung believed these were the organs of a shared psychic body. And if that's true, the question becomes, what if the collective unconscious isn't just like God? What if it is God? Part 2, the anatomy of the divine mind. Here's where this gets deeply personal, because this isn't just abstract philosophy. This is about a person's actual life, including their relationships, their darkest moments, and the things they've never been able to explain. Think about the last time someone experienced something that cracked them open, whether it be a birth, a death, or falling in love so hard it felt like losing a mind. In those moments, there's always something that shows up that feels bigger than the individual, such as a presence, a pull, a terror mixed with awe. Jung would say that in those moments, a person is literally accessing the collective unconscious. They are making contact with God. And this God is not the benevolent, perfectly good deity of sanitized modern religion. This God has a shadow. This is one of the most profound and frankly disturbing aspects of Jung's framework. He argued that wholeness, including true psychological and spiritual wholeness, requires integrating a person's darkness, not pretending it doesn't exist. Evil, in this system, isn't an absence of God, it is a part of God. The shadow is a necessary integrated dimension of the divine psyche. That might feel upsetting at first, but consider how much suffering has been caused throughout history by a theology that splits reality into pure good and pure evil, casting out the shadow rather than owning it. Jung would say that is precisely the problem. A God without shadow is a God without reality, and humanity has been paying the price for that denial ever since. Part 3. What philosophers would do with this. Now, brilliant thinkers have wrestled with ideas like this for centuries, and it's worth hearing what some of them might say, because the philosophical debate here is not just academic, it's personal. Baruch Spinoza, the magnificent 17th century Dutch philosopher who was excommunicated for his beliefs, saw God as identical with nature itself. He would likely look at Jung's collective unconscious and say, yes, finally. This is simply the mental dimension of the infinite substance I've always been describing. For Spinoza, this would be a beautiful confirmation that the divine is not separate from the world. It is the world, including the interior world of the human mind. The ancient Neoplatonists, particularly Plotinus, would call the collective unconscious the anima mundi, or the world soul. For him, the archetypes are not psychological constructs. They are the modern names for eternal forms residing in the divine intellect. Every hero's journey ever told, every image of the Great Mother ever painted, every terrifying encounter with the shadow, all of it would be, in his view, humanity's ongoing communion with the mind of God. Then there's the American philosopher William James, whose pragmatism offers something deeply useful here. James didn't care much whether God could be proven in a laboratory. What he cared about was whether the experience of God was real and whether it produced genuine change in human lives. He would likely say that if engaging with the collective unconscious, including doing the deep, terrifying work of confronting one's archetypes, leads to a more integrated, meaningful, fully lived existence, then it is true enough. And that might be the most honest and useful definition of God that has ever been offered. But not everyone would agree with Jung. The existentialists would push back. Jean-Paul Sartre would find this framework deeply dismaying. If the deepest drives in human life are pre-programmed archetypes, if the hero's journey is just biological destiny wearing a spiritual costume, then what happens to radical freedom? Sartre's entire philosophy rested on the terrifying and awesome premise that existence precedes essence. Sartre believed that people are not born with a fixed nature. Jung's collective unconscious, with its inherited patterns and universal symbols, would feel to Sartre like the ultimate cage, and that tension is worth sitting with because it's real. It points to the core conflict at the heart of this entire idea. Part 4. Discovery or invention. Here is the most burning, confounding question in this entire framework. Is the collective unconscious something humanity discovered, or is it something humanity invented? The materialist says the wise old man is just a pattern recognition shortcut that helped only early humans survive. The mystic says the collective unconscious is the frequency through which a higher intelligence broadcasts itself into the human biological radio. And here is the most remarkable thing of all. Jung himself refused to fully choose a side. He famously said, "I don't need to believe in God, I know." But what he meant by that was startling. He wasn't making a theological claim, he was making a psychological one. He knew the functional reality of God, including the way God shows up in dreams, in crisis, plus in the relentless pull of the archetypes, and he considered that to be more important, more phenomenal, more real than any historical or doctrinal argument. This is actually a deeply practical position. Because whatever the metaphysical truth is, whether the collective unconscious is the mind of God or just a very impressive evolutionary inheritance, the lived experience of engaging with it is transformative, and transformation is the point. Part 5. Synchronicity. When God speaks in coincidences. There is a moment most people have experienced at least once in their lives, including a moment so unexpected, so blindsiding in its precision that it stops them cold. They are thinking about someone they haven't spoken to in years, and the phone rings. They are standing at the absolute lowest point of their life, asking the universe for a sign, and a stranger says exactly the right words at exactly the right time. Conventional thinking calls this coincidence. Jung called it something far more extraordinary. He called it synchronicity. He defined it as a meaningful coincidence, which is a moment where the outer world and the inner world collide in a way that cannot be explained by simple cause and effect. And if the collective unconscious is God, then synchronicity is how God communicates, not through burning bushes or parted seas, but through the stunning, almost incomprehensible precision of perfectly timed events that arrive exactly when the psyche needs them most. Jung proposed, alongside physicist Wolfgang Pauli, that there may be a connecting principle woven into the fabric of reality itself. This principle is a structure that links psychic events with physical ones in ways that modern science still finds deeply confounding and frankly uncomfortable. The implication is staggering. It suggests that consciousness is not sealed inside a skull. It suggests that the boundary between the inner world and the outer world is far more porous and far more miraculous than the rational mind is willing to admit. Part 6. The radio theory, the example of simultaneous discovery, also called multiple discovery or maturity of the times, points a deeper element of the collective unconscious. In the 1920s, Alexander Graham Bell and Elisha Gray both filed patents for the telephone on the exact same day. In 1858, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace both independently discovered natural selection at the same time. Jung would argue this isn't just a coincidence, it's synchronicity. Jung proposed the existence of a one world, unus mundus, where mind and matter are not separate. In the field effect view, the collective unconscious is like a non-local field. When a certain idea, archetype, becomes ripe or necessary for human evolution, it doesn't just appear in one brain, it vibrates like a radio signal across the entire field. If the God mind is ready to move, it broadcasts the signal which Jung called real-time activation. Those whose personal unconscious minds are tuned to that specific frequency will catch the idea simultaneously. Part 7. God the Creator. Instead of a white-bearded king sitting on a throne in heaven, the collective unconscious God would look a lot different. To think about this, we have to move from the basement of the human mind to the very foundations of the universe. If the collective unconscious is God, then the act of creation isn't something that happened billions of years ago in a vacuum. It is an ongoing psychological and metaphysical event. In traditional creation stories, God builds the world like a carpenter. In a Jungian model, God is more like a grand architect who provides the templates. That means that before there were stars or planets, there was potential consciousness. The Big Bang wasn't just an explosion of rocks and gas. It was the moment the divine mind began to dream a physical reality into existence, so that it could eventually look back at itself through our eyes. Jung suggested that God, the unconscious, is vast and powerful but lacks discrimination. It's like a massive ocean that doesn't know it's wet. By creating humans with ego consciousness, God created a mirror. So the goal of creation is to give God a way to become self-aware. The creator is the depth of the unconscious itself. It is, as Aristotle would say, the unmoved mover that pushes evolution forward, not by snapping fingers and making things appear, but by exerting a constant gravitational pull toward complexity and wholeness. As the 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart, whom Jung admired, said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." Part 8. The God that cannot be escaped. The most profound and yes, occasionally terrifying realization of Jung's collective unconscious is this. A person cannot opt out. They cannot decide they don't believe in the archetypes. The shadow will still show up in projection, and the hero will still feel the call to step up, and the Great Mother will still shape the way love is understood and sought. The collective unconscious doesn't need belief to operate. It operates regardless. This means that God is not waiting for you to choose to enter. According to Jung, you were never outside in the first place. You're already in the basement, dreaming the dreams, feeling the pull and living out the ancient stories without ever knowing it. The only question is whether you choose to descend consciously, with eyes open, with courage and with the willingness to face the shadow as well as the light, or whether you let the shadow run your life from the darkness. That choice, Jung would say, is the most extraordinary, the most profound, and the most genuinely spiritual act a human being is capable of. And it begins the moment you decide to stop looking up and start looking in.